Welcome to the Ogle's channel. Thanks for watching today, and let's do a ranking or a tier list of all the games that are included in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga collection. It's going to be coming out within the next, hopefully a few weeks, probably a couple months though, if I was guessing. But if you want to know more about that game in particular, you can check out a link above where I did a announcement for it, a potential release date, what's all included, such as that. But essentially, all of the NES games, all the SNES, all the Genesis, and all the Game Boy games, and the arcade games as well, all included. So 13 games total in the Cowabunga collection is going to be coming out. And so today, we're just going to rank all these games. S to F, where do all of these games fall into the ranking? And so, let's get started. First off, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the NES. And honestly, I really like this game. I know a lot of people really hate the game and have a lot of negative memories of it as a kid. But to me, it was really hard. I never beat it as a kid, but I always had fun playing it because you got to play as a Ninja Turtle. And the graphics on it are fantastic. The action is actually pretty fantastic. The ambition is pretty fantastic as well, but the execution does fall short a little bit because the game is notoriously difficult and almost unfair difficult in a lot of areas as well. I know a lot of people were disappointed because this one didn't necessarily bring in a lot of things from the show, but it is based on more on the comics, and if you read the comics, there's a lot of stuff you can pull out from the comics that make more sense, especially for the enemy design. And I did a whole video on that, and you can check that out up above if you want to go back and watch that, where I actually broke down all the enemies in the game and how they actually fit in pretty good to comic books and things like that. But it's not a perfect game, but it is definitely a really good game. And if you haven't given it a try, or if you haven't, gave up on it as a kid, I definitely say go back and give it another go at some point. But it's not an S tier, but I think it's a solid A tier game. It's a really good Turtles game. Second up, we had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, which is basically the NES port of the arcade game. And to me, this game doesn't hold up quite as well as my memory as a kid on the game. Because as a kid, I loved the game because it looked more like the Turtles. It had a little bit more of the Turtles humor. But it's actually, to me, harder than the first Turtles game. And I never beat this again until I was an adult. And it still seems sort of unfair, more so than the first one, in my opinion. Because it's like they took the difficulty of the arcade, but in the arcade you keep putting quarters in the machine to continue on. But in this, you can't do that. You just simply have to die and start the game over. And to me, it's a really difficult game. And they obviously downgrade the graphics quite a bit. There's a lot of flickering on the screen. It's not as pretty looking game as the arcade. And honestly, a lot of times it makes you just wish you were playing the actual arcade game. And so to me, I don't think it's as good a game as the first one. Honestly, I think it's a B tier game. Not a bad game. I don't find myself going back to want to play this version a whole lot. And so I'm putting it as a solid B tier game. And up next, we have, to me, was the pinnacle of turtle gaming on the NES, and this is going to be the Manhattan Project. They took everything that was good about the arcade port for the NES with the Turtles 2, and they improved it with better enemy design, better level design, just more fun. The difficulty was right, more gimmicks in the game, and it's just a great game. It's fun to play, it's fun to go back to, and it's not overly difficult. And so, to me, the Manhattan Project is going to be our first S tier game. It's just a great game, and if you haven't played Manhattan Project, I strongly suggest you going back to give it a try. So let's go ahead into the Game Boy Turtles games, and the first one is going to be Fall of the Foot Clan. And this is a really fun game. It is very simple, it's very short, the graphics are pretty good for the Game Boy, it's a little bit more platformy than some of the arcade ones, but it's just a fun game. It's not a groundbreaking game, it's not one that you find yourself going back to a lot, but it is a solid, fun arcade-ish, platform-ish Turtles game. And so, while it's definitely not going to be on the same level as, say, like S tier or A tier, and I probably wouldn't put it on the same level as the arcade game either, because it's not quite as good as that when it comes to the NES port, but I think it's a solid C tier game. If you're on the road, want a Turtles game, it's a good option to go to. And they followed up Fall of the Foot Clan with Back from the Sewers. And they improved the graphics of this game. They improved some of the game modes a little bit in the game. Some of the options. But they took back on the fun factor. And so it's just not quite as good as Fall of the Foot Clan. But I don't think it deserves to be a whole tier lower, because the things that are not as good as Fall of the Foot Clan, it improves in other areas like the graphics and the options and the little mini games and such. And so I would actually say it's going to be on the same level, even though I don't think it's quite as good a game as Fall of the Foot Clan. If you can only have one of these two games to play on the road, go with Fall of the Foot Clan. But Back from the Sewers is still a solid Game Boy option. And up next, we have the final game of the Game Boy trilogy of Turtles, and that's going to be Radical Rescue. And this is a completely overlooked game by so many Turtles fans. I think because it came out sort of late in the Turtle craze and people just sort of overlooked it. But it's a great Metroidvania. It's you get to start off as Michelangelo, find the other Turtles as you go. They all have special moves to unlock new areas inside this giant overworld. It's a great game. If it was on the NES, I'd probably say it's an S tier game. But since it's on the Game Boy, and they obviously had to scale the game back a little bit on some of their ideas, I'd say it's a solid A tier. And there's pretty much no complaints on that game except for maybe the difficulty. And at the end of the game, especially when you're fighting like all the bosses back to back to back, it gets a little rough. But honestly, it's a great game. If you're looking for a Turtles game on the go, Radical Rescue is by far your best bet. And of course, you can't talk about Turtles games without getting to the SNES games. And that first one you're going to have is Turtles in Time. And Turtles in Time, oh man, this perfected everything you wanted in an arcade turtle game. And it's a 100% an S tier game. Great level design, great action, great graphics, and it's actually a little bit better than the arcade version itself because they brought in like Rocksteady and Bebop. They brought in Slash was in this game. The level design was a little bit tweaked, and it's just a little bit more polished than the arcade version, and the difficulty is perfect for a system. It's very much similar to Manhattan Project in that aspect. The difficulty is perfectly on par for a console game to run through it pretty quick, but also have a ton of fun. There's more game options in this one as well. You had like a versus mode or a time attack, and it's just a great game to go back and play with friends. It's a great game to go back and play by yourself. It's just a great game overall. And if you're looking for just a single Turtles game to play arcade style, Turtles in Time is probably going to be your fallback on that. Even though Manhattan Project is great, Turtles in Time has a little bit better graphics, and it's probably thought of more fondly in most people's memories. And at the same time Turtles in Time came out, you also had Hyperstone Heist come out on the Genesis. And this takes everything that was great about Turtles in Time, and it's almost like a fan hack of Turtles in Time because they mix the levels up, they mix some of the enemies up, and they mix some of the action a little bit. The controls are a little bit better, I will say that, but everything else on Hyperstone Heist just feels like a fan-made ROM hack of Turtles in Time. And I don't think it's a bad game because it's pulling off the same game engine as Turtles in Time, but it's definitely not a super solid game. I'm going to say it's a B game, a B tier. Still a good option to play, but just simply not as good as Turtles in Time, which is basing itself off of. And then we get into the tournament fighters. And the tournament fighters, these aren't necessarily my style of game. I'm not really big on just simply arcade fighters, but they definitely vary in quality depending on which system you get the game on. We'll start off with the Genesis one. And the Genesis one has a darker tone to it. The graphics are a little more aligned with the comics. And it's a lot harder too. Like, it's a very hard game actually, to the point where I can't even like enjoy the game. I can't get past like the first like round or two. I play with friends, it's a little bit better, but it's way too hard of a game. Probably the hardest game on this entire list, honestly. And I'm going to put it as a D ranking because I don't think the fighting mechanics are very good in the game. Graphics are good. That's about it, and some of the darker tone. But it's definitely one of the lower games on this list. And that leads us into the NES Turtles Tournament Fighter. And it also, I'm going to go and put a D tier. I don't think this is a bad game necessarily. It really pushes what the NES can do, and it's one of the only fighters on the NES. Has some really unique enemy choices in there, stuff that you only saw from either the comic books or action figures. But it's very, very limited because it's a 2-button fighter. It's not a bad fighter considering it's on the NES, but it's not one you're ever going to go back and play ever. And so it's definitely going to be a D tier game compared to the other tournament fighters. And then we have SNES Tournament Fighters, which is definitely the best fighter on the list. It's smooth mechanics, actually pretty good, long lasting when it comes to like fans who play this game still. And I'm going to say Tournament Fighters on the SNES is probably going to be we'll say it's a B tier game. It's not necessarily my style of game, but there is a large fan base from it, and it's a well executed game, and it's still fun to go back and play with friends sometimes. Good fighters in it, good enemy choice, okay story, but it's a B tier game. And then of course we move into the actual arcade games themselves, which we've sort of covered already, but not necessarily the arcade version, because each of these are going to have 4 players versus just the console, which always had 2 players. And we'll do the first arcade game. And the first arcade game, it was really huge as a kid, and everybody pretty much loved it. But I don't think it's an S tier game. I think it's probably a solid A tier game, just simply because I think the Turtles in Time is a little bit better, and I also think that there are a few other things that can be perfected on it. 4-player, great action, but I don't think it's an S tier game based upon this list, because I can see what's in the S tier, and this game just doesn't hold up as well as the 2 above it. And of course we had a Turtles in Time arcade game, and I would normally put it as an S tier game, but I'm going to put it as an A tier game along with the other one because the SNES version perfected everything good about this version. I mean, I know it only had 2-player action instead of 4-player action, but the enemies were better, the graphics were a little bit better, and the soundtrack to me sounded maybe a little bit better. That could just all be in my head, I don't know, hearing it more at home. But I do think the arcade version just falls back a little bit compared to what the SNES put out. And the SNES also had some extra game modes, which improved the replayability a little bit of it as well. And so, great choice, great option, and if you have an actual arcade machine, hey, really fun to play. But I think the SNES version is like the definitive version of Turtles in Time. Now notice, guys, I didn't put anything in the F tier because I don't think any of these Turtle games are horrible games. I think they all have something good going for them in their own right. But definitely, if you're just going to play 2 of them, Manhattan Project and Turtles in Time is going to be your best nostalgic memory of bringing Turtles back to life of what you remember. If you're looking for just a solid gameplay experience that's got a few flaws in it, I'd probably go with the first Turtles game or Radical Rescue. And truth be told, the first Turtles game is my personal favorite of all of these. And it's not just because of nostalgia, it's also because I think it's just a solid game. And if you overlook the difficulty a little bit, I think you'll find the most rewarding experience of any of these. But it does have some overload on the difficulty. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with this tier list? How would you arrange the games that are coming out in the Cowabunga collection? Which one are you most excited to play first? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And as always, go out there, find a great game to play, and just simply have a great rest of the day.